Hey there, my name's Fay Brown and I am an infantile, childhood and teenage survivor of sexual abuse. My abuse started before we were out of nappies, and we were out of nappies at 1. Me and my sister were both sexually abused by my paternal grandfather, and I didn't really know what was happening to me at first, other than I was really confused that my granddad wanted to touch my bottom. My mother would sometimes peek at the nappy to check what's going on in my nappy, but he would do it as well, but he would actually molest me during those things, and I found it very confusing because, oh, well, mummy does that, so maybe this is an extension of that, some kind of care. And I finally told them when I was about 3. I had started wetting my bed again because of the trauma, and my mother stated that she kept finding blood in our knickers but didn't do anything about it, and she was very cross, very non-maternal, quite narcissistic and really not very caring. She could be very angry, and one time I said, "Mummy," and she was hoovering in our room. She stopped the machine and just looked at me and was like, "What?" And I was like, "Oh shit," and I couldn't remember what I was going to say, and so I just blurted out, "Why does Grandad touch my bottom?" And she said, "What did you say?" And I repeated the sentence, and my sister said, "I told you not to tell." And I looked at her and thought, you know? And we've had a conversation about it? Like, I was really shocked because I didn't know that my sister was being abused as well at that time. And then my mother just left the room and never spoke to me about it again. My father, who was his father, who sexually abused both his daughters, had also sexually abused most of his own daughters, and got together with my father's mother when she was a minor. He was 15 or 16 years older than her, and she was pregnant as a minor, so he married her. So all of it is pretty gross. And my dad just did cassette player recording and interviewed me, and I've listened to that tape once because he wouldn't allow me to have it. And when I listened to it, my voice is so young, and he asked questions like, "How old were you when it started?" And I said 6, and I was like 3.5. So it showed how little understanding I knew of what I was, let alone what this man was doing to me and why. And that was the last he ever spoke to me about it. Just recorded this thing, this really serious thing, and then we carried on seeing them, carried on having to give him a kiss goodbye and hug him and be nice to Grandad. And it was just awful. I just felt utterly abandoned in it, and as if I didn't matter at all. Especially because I'd fallen out of the bed and split my lip through my tooth. My mum and dad had come in, and they were both shouting at each other of who's going to deal with it. They were calling me it. "I can't deal with it, I can't deal with it." And she was like, "I can't deal with it, I can't deal with it." And then he finally stood up and was like, "Oh," because the blood was pouring into my nightie. I was holding it, and then it was dripping through, and they were getting angry with me that I was getting blood on the floor. But like, what else I didn't know what else to do. And my dad said, "Right, I'll do it," and like grabbed me, and my mum said, "Do it nicely, do it nicely." And I thought, oh God, he's going to kill me, because it was the pitch black middle of the dark. He took me in his van, we went driving in the middle of nowhere, and I was petrified the whole time because my mum had been saying, because I'd been wet in the bed, that she would leave me out for the bins, and she kept leaving me out for the bin man to take me because I was so dirty. And even after they knew, they were still putting it across as if I was dirty because my body was responding to abject trauma. I really did think I was going to get murdered and chucked away. He actually took me to the hospital. The doctor who was going to stitch my lip said I was playing up for him, so could he leave the room, and my dad just left because he didn't care, happy to wash his hands. And then the surgeon or doctor put a gas mask on my face, and he had his hand on my leg so high up that his index finger was touching my labia like this. So I knew I was scared, and I was shouting for my dad, "Don't go, don't go." And he was like, "She's just playing up for you." And he made him leave, and then he sexually abused me as I was going under. And because my grandparents would drug us, I was drug raped and assaulted. And they would make these cakes or put things on called Finnegan, and my granddad would say, "Which ones are the Fen cakes?" And I never understood it until I was like 35 when someone said about Finnegan, and I just suddenly remembered, oh my God, that's what they were doing. And it was so weird to be at their house when we shouldn't be at their house. You shouldn't be leaving me at their house, knowing that you're getting tired and you don't nap in the day anymore, and you know that you're not safe, and you're trying to find somewhere to hide that's safe so that when you're unconscious you're not going to get molested. And it was just turmoil the entire time there. So I was very aware of being drugged, and so I've had a lot of things taken advantage of me at times where I wasn't even conscious. We moved house, and when we moved house I got very suicidal. I didn't know that's what it was at the time because I was only 4.5, but we moved to a house where I could climb out of my window and there was an extension there, and then a first floor drop to the floor. So at this new house I would stand on the edge of the ledge and I would stare down at it, just willing myself to just fall off head first. And I just was really like, you know, I could just die. It was a real big thought from 4.5. They went away on holiday and they had my grandparents come, the predators come to our house. The grandma was very like psychopathic. They would both torture me in ways that didn't leave harm, or was harmful but didn't leave marks. So they would grab me by the legs and start swinging me around, and like my head would be, I would feel it like brushing past the table in the living room and feel like, oh God, they're going to let me go into the wall, and I'd be screaming, and then I'd feel so sick. I had such vertigo after. And they also made me eat butter, just spoonfuls of butter to make me ill on it. And we were at our new house and she was making me do it in front of everyone because she was going to punish me for what I said about Granddad. And they all just let me do it. And then my mum all of a sudden said, oh, stop now because she's going to be sick and I'll have to deal with it. And I just thought, you don't care enough to stop it until you're going to have to deal with it. So ongoingly, there was a difference between how they treated me and how they treated my sister. My sister got a load of care and response and counselling, and she got to address Grandma and Granddad and what they did and how they made her feel. But I was literally never spoken to again about it. And any time it did come up, because my sister would have it come up, she would blame me for triggering her. And really I just felt, well, am I not allowed to cry about this too? Because this happened to me as well. Am I just not real? And my dad would always state that I had lied, and I just felt utterly abandoned in it. I didn't feel like I was allowed to have children because I had this thing which I now know is called autopaedophilia. Auto, self, pedo, child, philia, affinity, affection, a connection to. So in other words, a self-understanding of a child part inside that's separate from the adult persona. My grandfather would regularly give me orgasms, so there was a whole load of conflict between my actual sexual arousal and sexual abuse, which is why it became this autopaedophilia. And the way that it affected me was that I would have flashbacks that were real. I would have night terrors with orgasms quite often, where I'd be waking up from a terrible night terror whilst having this overwhelming, intense feeling in my body and just feeling absolutely scared of it all. I'd have scream jumps where I'm on such hyper alert that I'm involuntary regressing. And I would have involuntary regression when I got triggered, if I got extremely upset, this whole shrinking down would happen. And this child part would be there, but very mute, really not doing a lot other than just shutting down. But I wasn't myself, I wasn't the age I was, and it still happens now. I have involuntary aggression all the time, and I still have night terrors every single night. I do not sleep. It's very difficult to overcome. When I have intimacy, I have flashbacks, especially when I'm orgasming. Like, it doesn't matter how hard I try. I almost gave up on sex, or just thought I'm not gonna have orgasms because I hate them. I hate what happens inside my brain when that's coming on, and all of a sudden I'm flooded with all these visions and flashbacks and feelings and visceral emotions that I would often cry after sex because I was so isolated in this terrible fear. And this autopaedophilia fear would cause paedophilic obsessive compulsive disorder or child sexual abuse obsessive compulsive disorder, where you have an irrational fear that you are going to either become a paedophile or actually, because that's always conflated, be a child sex offender. And actually POCD is the most prevalent version of OCD, full stop. And that's with people who haven't ever been sexually abused. That's just around sexual disturbances and OCD, number one version. So it's very prevalent in people who've had sexual abuse because they fear what's going on in their brain and their body means something. It's something waiting to happen. I'm something bad waiting to happen. And of course that rhetoric of abusees become abusers, and very much feeling responsible for that entirely. So I wasn't going to have children. When your body is so young, it doesn't know how to process and accommodate seriously traumatic events. And your brain gets clever and your body gets clever. And it's not until you're an adult that you start really fighting with how clever your body has been, because none of it makes sense in adulthood. It might have made sense back then, and even then it didn't really make sense. But in adulthood, it's war. You get to adulthood and you're like, oh, what do I do with this now? And I've been campaigning. I started a charity, I wrote a book, I qualified as a counsellor, I've specialised in child abuse and prevention. I work with a lot of charities, global experts, doctors who are specialised in child abuse and its prevention. And I've dedicated my life's work to making difference.
Childhood sexual abuse, especially infantile, incest, and groomed child on child sexually harmful behavior for adults watching, autopaedophilia, can be a predominant trauma and survivor response. Possibly the mirror neurons creating accommodation.
When we're talking about that kind of profound abuse that happens so early in life, we're talking about a number of responses in the nervous system that we can see habituated over time or become a habitual response over time. And I think there's a lot of work out there about critical windows for abuse and neurobiological difference over time. So I want to point towards Marty Teicher's work and some others on answering that question, because that's an important question to ask, and I think that the answer is more complex than I can really get into right now.
Because autopaedophilia is not well known, and there's a whole load of things that come under that umbrella term. Things like autistic age sliding. Autistic people can have a distinctly separate childlike self that they almost have to sort of get back into adulting. That's autopaedophilia. Dissociative identity, child autism, that's autopaedophilia. Flashbacks, night terrors of child abuse, that's autopaedophilia. Even people that have had no child abuse and have an arousal to trauma and abuse fetish comes under that as well. So there's a lot of people that are in this regression space on all different spectrums, on all different levels, on different categories of self. And there's a whole load of bigotry around that, because a lot of people say it's not sexual. Mine's not sexual, mine's not sexual. But actually, if it's a sexual abuse wound, it is sexual. And if you're telling it it's not sexual, then you're rape culturing it again. So you think you're doing this child part work, but actually you're giving them a second crap childhood, because you are producing that rape culture and projecting onto them shame and guilt for surviving in a way that isn't deemed acceptable, when actually it's a perfectly usual condition from a lot of different categories of people, different disorders. But also it's very usual, especially children who've had infantile or throughout childhood sexual abuse, especially children who have never had justice or in fact were villainised and demonised, especially children that were groomed by adults to have sex with other children. All of that causes brain disturbances, different channels linking, and the brain just tries to, in childhood, go, I'm going to just try and make this the least hurtful as possible. In the brain, trauma and fetish and sex are all in a similar place, which is why it can all get connected. It's very difficult to come to terms with the conditions that you're left with in survival. And I just want everyone else to know they have something going on with their body, with their sex life, with their brain, with their feelings, their ability to understand self. They just have to hide, hold in, put to one side, and become less and less of a person and more an inauthentic role that you perform at the servitude of others. Because I'm just lucky you're letting me be around because I'm so evil, and I thoroughly believe that. So it's easy for us to get taken advantage of and to be re-abused and put into exploitation, isolated, and dealing with suicidal level issues, complete obliteration of self, and that responsibility of being bad, and what am I meant to do about that? And because of that, I dedicated my life's work and my career and myself and my energy to platforming and educating and creating the space for these things to be cared for. Child sexual abuse survivorhood and child sexual abuse prevention, limitation, response is the most noble thing, and is the most critical thing in regards to any generation of people coming forward, that they could become a person. Because if you have adverse childhood experiencing and a lack of care or love or response, or in fact villainization, demonization and abandonment, then you're going to think you're all sorts of kind of evil, and you're going to believe what everyone says, and you're going to be scared of yourself. And I don't want people to have to do that anymore, because these conditions exist, they're real, they're nothing to be ashamed of. Nothing that happens to me because of my child abuse is something that I'm doing, and I shouldn't be judged for how I survive.